you can only change somebody's mind over dinner. And what it means is like, nobody's going to change their mind because of your opinions. They're only going to change their mind because they see the person behind the opinions. If I want to change somebody's mind, I just need to invest in them. I need to befriend them. I need to have them over for dinner. And then, of course, the danger is when I have them over for dinner, they might actually change my mind because I see what kind of person they are. Because that's what we're missing is we stop seeing each other as people, as persons. And we started seeing somebody as a caricature of their ideology or their religion or their political conviction, etc. So we need to go back to see people as people.
Welcome to the Cultural Agility Podcast, where we explore the stories of some of the most advanced intercultural practitioners from around the world to help you become culturally agile and succeed in today's culturally complex world. I'm your host, Marco Blankenberg, International Director of KnowledgeWorks, where every day we help individuals and companies achieve relational success in that same complex world. Welcome, everybody, to this next episode of our Cultural Agility Podcast. And I'm very excited about today's recording because we have two intercultural couples in our virtual studio. And I'm really excited about this conversation. So Bart, Julie, Bryce and Thelma, thank you for joining us today. And I'm very much looking forward to hear your stories and how the intercultural side of the relationships have impacted your lives in a variety of ways. So maybe Bryce and Thelma, if you could start with a brief introduction, and Bart and Julie, if you follow suit, and then we'll go straight into the conversation.
Thanks, Marco. My name's Bryce, and I'm here with my wife.
Thelma. I'm from Thelma. And I'm from Nigeria.
And I'm from the U.S.
Wonderful. So good to have you. Thank you.
Well, I'm Julie, and I'm from the States, and currently we're overseas, and this is where Bart and I met many years ago, and I'm staying home with our two teenagers. They're 12 and 14, so it's good to be here.
So I'm Bart. I'm from the Netherlands, the part that's called Holland, actually. And I met my wife, Julie, in the United Arab Emirates in a city called Al Ain.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So Bart and Julie, you already started to get into a little bit of your story, but maybe for our audience, maybe you want to add a few things in terms of how you met, how you got to know each other?
Yeah, we actually met in the Emirates in church, actually. And I kind of stood out because I was the only single guy at that time in the church. And I just remember Julie saying after our wedding, yeah, she really liked me, though I had a few weird things around me. She still liked me, so that was good. And then as we got married, I actually had half my family coming over to the States and spent a week with us before the wedding. And her opinion changed. It was like, oh, not Bart has a few weird things around him, his whole family does. And then we were lucky a year later to spend 6 months in the Netherlands. And she came to the conclusion that it's the whole country that is weird. And that's culture.
Yes, I remember in our early days of getting to know each other, and even the first year of marriage, how direct Bart was and some of his friends and family members. And sometimes it was really harsh to me because, I come from a culture that I guess is just very affirming. And I would think, oh, you can't talk to people like that. And I was the only one that had a problem with it. Everybody else was fine and they were laughing. And I just learned that those are just differences. In humor is sometimes doesn't cross cultures and translate very well. And it was just different. I had to learn their way of talking and different directness and humor even. And I just grew into that and really learned to embrace and love who Bart is and understand who he is. So yeah, it was those early days of differences.
Fantastic. So Bryce and Thelma, how did you guys meet?
Well, I moved to Dubai in 2018 for work, and I met my now wife, at church as well.
Yeah, I was here. I moved here for university. So I moved to Dubai for university around 4 years before Bryce moved here. And I was going to this church called Covenant Hope. And I actually heard of Bryce before he showed up because he had emailed the church asking if he could bring some instruments because he plays a lot of musical instruments, which has been great. But yeah, so that's how I got to hear about Bryce. So I actually heard about him, that this American guy was going to come and he was willing to help us with our music, which was really exciting. And so he showed up. And of course, he really stood out because, I mean, our church is pretty diverse, but you know when a new person steps in because they're just pretty different. Yeah, so that was how we met.
Fantastic. Now, you already started to allude to what attracted you to each other. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about that. So maybe Thelma, just keep talking.
Yeah, so let me see. The first thing I learned about Bryce was just how much he loved to interact with people, like his love for people. I remember the first time I actually spotted him, he was talking to a friend of mine right across the room. And I had this, I wanted to tell my friend about my week. So I just stood in line kind of behind him, awkwardly at the side, just kind of waiting for him to finish whatever he was talking to her about. And I just was like, oh, who's this guy? Like, just really bold, talking to people. So that was the first thing that attracted me to him. And I guess that's kind of a little bit also like a cultural difference because I just feel like he's kind of very like he would approach someone first, which I think in my culture, sometimes we kind of wait for people to approach us first. So I kind of feel like that was like it was something that attracted me to him first off.
So Bryce, how was it on your side of the fence?
For me, Thelma definitely stood out, and she was much more outgoing than me. And so I was definitely attracted to her excitement and joy about life. So, and her excitement and joy on cheering others on, both in their faith and in different life events. I remember once she asked for a ride to see if someone could drop her off to cheer a friend who was skydiving. So she made a sign, and then she was going to cheer on her friend as she landed. And just observing instances of like that, of her excitement and going to cheer others on, was very attractive. Yeah.
Wonderful. Bart and Julie, you already started to talk about the uniqueness of Dutch versus American culture, but you already alluded to what drew you to each other. Is there anything you want to add to that from those early moments?
Yeah, I remember, Bart, I was single, living overseas, learning, teaching English as a second language, just kind of going on with my life. And as we would come to church or different mutual friends' houses, he would always be everywhere. It's like he would just show up. He just kept coming into my life. And I paid attention. I paid attention to his heart, the way he would walk around and talk to people, everybody. And he was learning the local language, and we were kind of working together sometimes. And it just kept more and more. My heart was open to this guy who was totally different than me, different culture, different language, different personality, different gifting, and an acute accent. So all that just attracted me, and it grew on me. But we really, really had to think through, like, well, I was enjoying my life. I was living where I wanted to be, and it was really cool to meet someone who had some similar values and really wanted to, live life together in a common way. So it was just really cool.
So Bart, from California to North Holland, very different worlds. What attracted you in Julie from those early days?
Wow, now I have to go back in memory for 20 plus years. I think what attracted me in Julie, I remember my roommate and I, we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of parties, actually, and a lot of singles parties, thanks to an Arab friend who really loved hosting those parties. And what attracted me to Julie was that she had passion in her life, passion to do certain things, and she was willing to give up comfortable life to pursue passions. And that really stood out to me. Somebody who wanted to follow her passions. And yeah, as our passions ended joining up, we just pursued passion together.
That's powerful. In the midst of that, of course, you are both intercultural couples from very different worlds. So what were some of those early moments, Bryce and Thelma, when you started to discover those cultural differences?
I would say I think one of my earliest memories of thinking, oh my goodness, Bryce is so different, was when he would say, hey, I'm coming to pick you up at 2 p.m. And he would show up at my door, like 5 minutes before 2 p.m. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you're so early. I thought you were going to be like 2:15 or 2:30. With my culture, it's a lot about like, not that we like being late to things, but we just take our time to do things. And so that was very different for me. And I think even with that, I realized that with Bryce's culture, it was a lot of like time oriented. Meanwhile, for my culture, is a lot more like relationship oriented. So say if Bryce had scheduled that we were going to have a date from 2 to 4 p.m., he is kind of already, thinking about like, oh, it's close to 4 p.m. We're going to round up. And I'm like, oh, I'm enjoying this conversation. Let's keep going. And we can keep going, because it's, this is a nice conversation. So I think that was one of my first, things that I noticed. It was really different in our cultures.
Yeah, that's great. Our concepts of time are radically different from around the world. And it's just a great example of that. Now, Julie, you already mentioned how, if I can say, the word honesty is handled very differently in where Bart comes from and his family. You only alluded to it, but maybe tell a little bit more about that. And how did you discover those early cultural differences between you and Bart's cultural journey?
Yes, I guess at one point, our second year of marriage, we spent 6 months in Holland with his family and around his family. We had our own place, but we spent a lot of time at his house where he grew up, and he's one of 7 kids. So, it's a big family. And I had a lot of culture to learn. So, but I think being in the Middle East, I expected a lot of culture shock. Being in Holland, I didn't really. I thought, oh, we're kind of Westerners. We're very similar. But living there and living life there, I remember being surprised by the hospitality of his family. And we don't, in California, I don't think we even know how to do hospitality. 1 or 2 hours and then you're out the door. You wouldn't really spend a whole long time all day with people. But with Bart and his friends and family, we would spend 4 or 5 hours all in Dutch, all clueless for me sometimes. So people would translate every once in a while. And just the time they took to be with people. Yeah, you still schedule that time, but when you're with people, you spend the time. And that was a pleasant surprise, just the hospitality and all kinds of coffee times that I didn't realize were really important in the mornings and the afternoons and the evenings. And even one time I was upstairs, it was 8 o'clock at night, and I was supposed to come down for coffee time. And I remember telling Bart, I'm not thirsty. And he just gave me the look like, you get to come down. I was like, okay, this is really important to him and to his family. And I came down, sat with my mother-in-law. And even if I didn't drink coffee, because I thought, oh, I'm not going to sleep, she just said, well, what else would you like to drink? And just the fact that I was there and spending that time was important. And I think I learned a lot about the value of family and time just in those 6 months that I hadn't seen in our first couple of years of marriage overseas, because we were in a neutral place, not in my culture or his culture. We were in the Emirates, and that was a really big eye opener for me.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And maybe also something, that it shows the difference across Dutch society. Some people might be like the Heiligenbergs, very hospitable, very people relationship oriented, and others might not. Bryce, Thelma alluded to the different view on time. What was it for you that really helped you understand, wow, we are very different culturally?
Yeah, the difference in time was definitely something I noticed as well. Another thing also we noticed is not just differences in our cultures of where we grew up, but also differences in family culture. So even if I grew up in the US, each family in the US in this sense has their own culture, and same in Nigeria. So for example, in communication, generally speaking, people in the US would be known to be more direct, and people in Eastern cultures to be more indirect. But we found in our case that me growing up in Midwest, where people are, quote, Midwest nice, I was more the indirect one. And Thelma, with her family, was more direct. So for me, I had more of an experience like you, Julie, where I was like, wow, sometimes when Thelma would say things, it would sound very harsh to me. But the more I got to know Thelma, I learned to appreciate her directness because I knew she was sharing those things because she loved me and cared for me. And so, yeah, as you get to know culture, it's helpful to seek to know the specific culture a person grew up in, not just in addition to the general culture of their country.
Yeah, and you bring up something that's really important and something that we're passionate about at KnowledgeWorks as well, is this whole idea that if you say, the average American, the average Nigerian, the average Dutch, and you use that as your baseline, then very likely you're going to discover a whole bunch of other things that might be radically opposite, like the example you just gave, Bryce. So this whole idea that we all are on our own cultural journey, and especially when you then start an intimate relationship, discovering what that journey is then becomes super important. So, Bart, Julie, you've lived a long time in California. And Julie, you alluded to that first time when you started to live in Bart's culture. Bart, what was it like for you to actually start living in the US? What did you discover about Julie, maybe about her family, that you never realized when you were living in the third culture in the Arabian Gulf?
Well, I was lucky that I did go to the US a couple of times before we actually spent the 6 months there. And we actually had a lot of American friends living here more than we had Dutch friends. So for me, it was like a gradual easing in. I think one of the things that stood out for me in Southern California is it's a very driven culture. And I was not used to that. The Netherlands, but especially here after 2-3 years in the Middle East, it's a lot more relaxed. Julie's family is very close knit, similar to mine, but still in a different way. We are very quiet people. Our family, you won't really hear the words "I love you" that much. It's said in indirect ways. Where her family is very verbal with affirmation, with affection. And those were differences that stood out. And of course, the whole famous, Americans are very famous for saying sorry. I know in the beginning of my marriage, Julie and I went a weekend away with a couple of other American friends. And like a day and a half in, I asked her, like, what's wrong with me? This guy keeps saying sorry to me like 15 times an hour. And I mean, being Dutch, I mean, we only say sorry if you literally knock somebody over or you punch him in the face. But I had to learn in America, somebody may say sorry if they come less than 6 feet. They're less than 6 feet away from you because they feel they're invading personal space or something like that. So I had to get used to those things.
Wow. There's so much more to say about that. Thank you for that, Bart. The word sorry, yes. I've heard that many, many times. So we've talked a little bit. We've hit on this idea of time, concepts of directness versus indirectness in terms of our communication, ideas of honesty. One of the tools that we love to use in KnowledgeWorks is the 3 colors of worldview, talking about doing the right thing, avoid doing the wrong thing, pursuing honor, avoiding shame, or looking at hierarchy as in position in relationships and navigating who's in what position in an appropriate way. Maybe Bart and Julie, or how do those things influence the way you grow in a relationship? Have you seen differences there as you got to know each other better?
I think for Julie and myself, when you look at the three colors of worldview, I think Julie and I are very similar in that innocence, guilt is right and wrong is very strong for us, and the others are not as important. But I think what I've seen is that it's still important for me as a husband to not just do right by my wife, but also to watch over her honor and to empower her. So to not just look at that strongest worldview driver, but all the other ones are just as important to thrive in a relationship.
Yeah, I think for us, I'm a stronger personality. So even though I have a similar worldview, I could easily dishonor Bart in a way that would really make him either angry or feel shame. And I had to learn early on to be very careful how I speak and the way I say things, to not crush his spirit. It's just, really, strong women can just bowl over some guys. And I think learning Bart had such a gentle, quiet spirit, even though he was definitely strong and he speaks his mind. It was a personality difference more than cultural, maybe. And I remember learning, well, this is a way to honor him and value who he is to be careful and learn how to speak in a way that shows love, even though I can express myself, but express it in a way that's not going to overpower or diminish who he is. And I really had to learn that in our marriage, especially. I learned it in friendships along in my life, but in a marriage, it could be so crushing and so destructive when you don't speak life and encouragement and, like he said, empowerment, and you actually can tear someone down.
Mm. And I think that's such an important insight, because we're talking about the subject of intercultural relationships today, but at the same time, what you're raising, Julie, is so important, that we're both cultural human beings, but we're also human beings with a personality and a behavioral style. And both are incredibly important to become aware of. First of all, your own, of course, and then the cultural wiring and the behavioral style of the other person. Thelma, Bryce, anything to add to that?
Yeah, we were just trying to remember, the first time we heard of those like categories of the worldview. And surprisingly, I'm more like, in my culture, in terms of a general sense, it'll be more like honor shame. A little bit of power fear too, because I'm from the northern part of Nigeria. But I think just because I've like grown up outside of the country, in a sense that I came here when I was a teenager. I came to Dubai when I was a teenager and was really surrounded by like Americans and like Asian people and like people from the UK. So just really kind of absorbed different cultures around me. And I kind of lean more towards right and wrong in a sense. And so I think that has actually made Bryce and I get along somewhat, because I can see where he's coming from. Sometimes when he's more strong on like, oh, we should do this because it's right. Even though he would stand for that a lot more than I would. I would still walk in the room and think about who is the most senior person in the room. I think that just like is at the back of my mind every time. And I see it a lot at work. So something that we've also realized is, so I work with a local company here, and Bryce, on the other hand, works with an American company. And our work cultures are just so different, because I have more Asians in my company. So there's a lot of like power fear around, in a sense that people are very aware and would always listen to whoever's in authority, and would talk a certain way to someone that's in authority versus someone that they see as their peer or below them. Versus with Bryce, it's kind of refreshing for the culture in his company is more kind of like a flat culture. So just even realizing that, I think being at work, I realized that that's something I've had to be aware of, like that everyone around me thinks, not particularly everyone, but most people around me think in a lot like, oh, this person is in authority, so we should do what they say we should do. More so, even a little bit without questioning it. Well, just due to my personality, I might want to question it, even though I recognize they're in authority. And so that's just kind of ways that that's played out in my relationships with other people at work, and also in our relationship with each other.
And as we talk about work with each other,
yeah,
it's helpful for me to remember that her work is a different culture.
Yeah.
And to try to keep that in mind.
Yeah. So an advice of my work for Bryce's workplace wouldn't work for mine. And so just keeping that at the back of our minds as we like talk with each other or even think through something that's happening, in each other's relationships with other people.
Yeah. So these three colors of worldview, they're not just, with loved ones or, friends, but they also are at play in work cultures. And you gave just beautiful illustrations of that. So on the one hand, we're talking, as intercultural couples, but at the same time, I'm just curious, the lessons you've learned as couples, how can people potentially apply those in any intercultural relationship? So when you think of the challenges that you have seen and the things you had to navigate, as well as the beautiful things, what should people be aware of in pretty much any intercultural relationship? What would be your let's say your top 2 or 3 things that you would like to communicate to our listeners?
It's funny because I started with the business part and so like, hey, this applies to our intimate relationships as well. And now we go the other way around. We start with intimate relationships and how can we apply it to, for instance, business? I think the things I learned is it is important to assume positive intent by the other, especially when you're culturally different. A colleague or a friend is not out there to tear you down. Sometimes they really think different, and you just have to ask, like, hey, what is going on? Why are you saying this? But you cannot always do that in the moment because a lot of cultures, context is everything. And in the Netherlands, I can stop somebody in their tracks in front of a lot of colleagues, and that is fine. In most countries of the world, you have to do that afterwards in a private setting and say, like, hey, what you said, it came across like this. Was this what you meant?
Yeah, I was actually going to mention that. I think assumptions, not to make assumptions of what people are intending to say or intending to mean, and just kind of assuming the best of people and always asking questions, just like you said, Bart. I think that's something I've realized, honestly, even working with people from different cultures, because I've been working at this company for around 5 years, and it's getting more diverse by the second, and it's a really big company. But just even how it's integrated into the culture of the company is to realize that, okay, people are from different places and have would act and think differently, but how much it's so empowering to know that just because you think in this way and someone else is seeing it from a different point of view, it doesn't necessarily mean that that point of view is wrong and yours is right. So kind of coming to people with the humble attitude of wanting to learn and see where they're seeing things from is one big thing that I've realized.
And Thelma and I see it a lot in our relationship with each other where at first when one of us does something, might be easy to get upset about it because we're assuming they mean something. Or I'm assuming that someone means something by that action that she doesn't actually mean. And so it takes effort in reminding myself to actually dig deeper, to ask questions, to listen, to try to understand the why behind specific actions.
I guess thinking of an example, even with the time thing, I got to realize that Bryce really felt like if I wasn't keeping to the time that he had said to me, that I wasn't caring for him, or I just didn't care about his time. Meanwhile, in my mind, I just never thought about it that way. Like, I just never thought, oh, I don't care about your time. No, I'd never say that. I'd never think that. But I was kind of communicating that with my action. And Bryce was kind of absorbing that and thinking of my action in that way. Until we had like multiple conversations about it where, he came to realize that I just wasn't like intending to disrespect him by not coming on time to something. And multiple other examples like that, where we just find that it's easier when we ask and just kind of see what the other person was thinking.
And it really sounds like slowing things down and not drawing conclusions too quickly. That seems to be a theme from what you've been sharing, but also learning to ask good questions. So we always talk about, being a cultural learner, and being a cultural learner, the why, Bryce, that you were alluding to, understanding the why. You can only do that by slowing things down and asking questions and listening. And it's so incredibly important. One thing that keeps on coming back, no matter what type of intercultural relationship we talk about, is the topic of trust. And it's so big right now, especially, we seem to be on the tail end sort of the COVID pandemic. And so many people have alluded to either how trust has eroded because people were not in the same space, or when it came to the family space, people have indicated that trust has grown because they were, quote unquote, forced to spend time together. But trust is always a big topic, especially in the intercultural space. So how does your cultural worldview, how does that influence the way you see trust in your relationship? Is there actually a difference? Do we view trust in different ways?
I think trust means different things to different people. And whether it's in your marriage or relationships at work or in the neighborhood, especially if there's people from a different culture, different worldview, it's really important to understand what builds trust with them. And how do I come across? In the West, we tend to just give people the benefit of the doubt because we don't want to judge people at first, get to know them, and then we'll see. And before we make any conclusions, we like to just spend that time. But in other cultures, especially from an honor-shame worldview, trust is given kind of within the family, within the tribe, in a small circle, but outsiders have to earn that trust. And then if you enter into a family, an extended family, because when you marry the family, you may not be at the highest trust level with everyone because you've come into a whole history, culture, a tribe, and it has to be earned. And that's really hard, especially if you're a spouse. And I've also had people ask me, well, how do you even get to know people from a different culture? How do you even know where to begin? And I always say, like you said, Marco, becoming that cultural learner, making a lot of observations, understanding the background, spending time. I think we think of relationships as short term. And I always ask people, are you asking me for the long term? Because if you're going to enter into a relationship with people who are different than you, you've got to think long term and slow down and say, I'm going to walk this journey for as long as this person is in my life or in my job or in my neighborhood, and spending time and living life together, having a meal together, go to events together, birthdays, weddings. It's just showering honor on people by spending that time and entering into their world is the biggest way you can start to build trust and understand what it means for them to trust you. And also when you break trust, how people make up. Conflict resolution is completely different in different ways as well.
Yeah. Wow, that is so important. Yeah. So starting with what you said at the beginning, Julie, this idea that some people give trust up front and some people give nothing up front and you have to earn it all. Those two opposite polarities almost. And if both those opposites are in one relationship between two people, that can be a huge gap to close or bridge to build. But practically, I know, Bart, you've done a lot of work on making trust building really practical. And we talk about those 4 words, for instance, reliability, honesty, openness, and respect. But how do we practically build trust across cultures? How does that work? What do we need to do?
Well, I'm just going to use the saying that you used in your last podcast. Trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and an eternity to rebuild. And I think when we look at trust, we need to look at these three instances and ask people like, hey, what activities build trust with you? So if we look at trust as something that is a behavior, then it's just easier to ask like, okay, what does build trust with you? And what behaviors break your trust? And what can I do to make up? Because like Julie said, making up is fully different in different cultures. In Western cultures, for instance, making up typically means saying, hey, I am sorry, I was wrong, I apologize, will you forgive me? We were talking with an Egyptian guy and asked him like, hey, if your wife blew it, what does she need to do to make it up? And he says, all she needs to do is take me to an expensive restaurant on a busy night. And does she need to say I'm sorry? And he said, not at all. Just take me to an expensive restaurant in public. And in his mind, it was not about the apologies. It was about being publicly honored by his wife. So one of the things we do is we give people a little quiz where we give them like 15 behaviors that would build trust, 15 behaviors that break trust, and 15 behaviors that might rebuild trust, and ask them which three of each category are most resonating with them, and start talking about it with their spouse. Because really, until you start talking with the other person about what builds trust with you and what breaks trust with you, people will keep breaking trust because they don't know how to build trust with you.
Yeah, and also recently, one of our friends, they have a 16-year-old daughter that was struggling with communicating back and forth with her. And when they gave her this trust quiz, it opened up so many doors for them to keep building trust and know how to build trust with her and with her parents. And it was really helpful. So behaviors are important to just, sometimes you can't think off the top of your head, well, I don't know what builds trust for me or breaks trust for me. But when you can think of some different activities or behaviors, it's a little easier to grasp.
Yeah, and I think that's really key because very often you don't know what you don't know, especially if you grow up in a certain culture and people start asking you, so what builds trust in how you grew up or what breaks it? Very often we don't know the words. Edward Hall is one of the trailblazers in the intercultural world. And he always used to say that culture is very good at hiding its intentions, especially to people who are from that culture. So getting some language to say, oh yeah, that builds trust, or no, that breaks trust in my situation. Getting the language to get that conversation going is really important. I would love to hear, Bryce and Thelma, from your side, when you think about the topic of trust, how have you practically been able to open up that conversation and maybe see trust grow between you?
Yeah, I think those 4 words that were shared, honesty, openness, respect, and reliability, does resonate with me and get me thinking about how Thelma and I are different in that way. So for me, building trust with my wife Thelma, honesty and openness are very important. If being real in conversations so that Thelma can know me, that's really how I can. One great way I can build trust with my wife, and it's when I'm not sharing, and when I'm more closed, that it's a lot harder for my wife to trust me. Whereas for myself, respect and reliability often I value more. So, Thelma being on time is one way that she can build trust with me. And so learning those things that we can do to build trust with one another is really helpful.
Yeah, I think that was something that we started learning when we were dating. Because I realized that I remember telling a friend just a couple of months into us dating, and I was like, I don't even feel like I know Bryce. And she was like, what do you mean? And I just was like, oh, I feel like he doesn't share a lot with me. And this is like a really close friend of mine, and like we've been friends for years. And she said to me, do you feel like you trust him? And I just feel like I realized at that moment that because Bryce wasn't really open with me, just because of his personality or just how different he was from me. I was beginning to kind of like, not really, it wasn't easy for me to give my trust. And so I mean, after conversations, following conversations from that, I just realized that, openness, when someone's really open with me, it just really helps me give my trust to them. And honesty, which is something that Bryce has learned about me, which I feel like is really spot on our relationship, and even now in marriage. And then for him, I kind of feel like I need to switch in my brain to know that, okay, I need to show him that he can rely. If he tells me to do something, or if we agree that I'm going to take ownership on something, making sure that I follow through on that is just really important for him. And times where I've seen that I've not followed through maybe on something I've said I was going to do, I just realized that it really affects him way more than it would affect me. And I remember at the beginning, I didn't understand it. I was like, why is this such a big deal? Just because it wasn't the same thing for me that would build my trust, So I think coming out of myself and realizing like, oh, this is what matters to him, for him to actually give me his trust, really helped us and has been helping us, to be honest.
Yeah, and related to that, understanding what does, for example, honesty and openness mean to the other person. Because me, I thought I was being honest and open, and that I wasn't hiding anything, but I was having more shallow conversations and not going as deep into my feelings or emotions on a situation, or sharing all my views. And so, learning what the other person's perspective is on those things.
I think it comes back to what Julie mentioned earlier, that it's really about being specific about those behaviors and learning to be specific, learning to have conversations about that. And it's fascinating. I was reminded as you were speaking about, there's 7 ways to build new habits. And one of the ways to do that is to actually create a richer language around the topic. Because then you can start talking more deeply and meaningfully about the topic. And as you build your vocabulary, you start to also articulate the why and why something works and why it doesn't work. And that's what I love about the intercultural work. But, we've talked about the 3 colors of worldview. We mentioned actually 3 or 4 of the 12 dimensions of culture as well. And having that language becomes so helpful as you start to build the shared cultural space in a relationship. Now, of course, we live in a world where intercultural part of life has become much bigger. And it's not just exclusively for the large metropolitan areas of the world, but people seem to be drifting everywhere. And what I noticed recently, there's a global risk study. And what fascinated me was that in that study, they asked people from around the world, what are you most concerned about when it comes to the season that we live in? And people were saying, one of the top 3 was actually that people were concerned about the erosion of the social fabric of society. And I was just wondering, from the lessons that you've learned, if people are concerned about the erosion of the social fabric, as in relational bridges seem to be crumbling, how would you advise our listeners to build those bridges across friends, loved ones, neighbors in the neighborhood, colleagues at the sports club? What would be practical ways that people can build cultural bridges? How have you done it? And how would you encourage our audience to do the same?
I think first thing that comes to my mind is really remembering that everyone needs a friend. I realized that even being at work, there's some friendships that I've gotten to enjoy that really started off by me just choosing to sit a little bit closer to the person than being off in the other corner that's free in the pantry. And I think that just maybe made the person feel like I was trying to invite them, and really giving a smile and saying a hello, how's work going? Like starting those little pleasant, like little complimentary conversations I find helpful. And I think even though, yes, I guess because we've come out of COVID and people have been locked away for so long, I think there is a sense that people have forgotten social cues in a sense. But even still just remembering that people would still like to interact. Of course, not invading people's personal space, but seeing, kind of being on the lookout for who doesn't really mind starting up a conversation.
That's very practical.
Yeah, and really just taking the time to seek to get to know other people. It takes time. And I think, especially with intercultural relationships, and with time too, the more personal method you can use to get to know someone, the better. So like often even communicating with someone from a different culture over chat or WhatsApp can be very challenging. Whereas if you're able to do a video chat or meet in person, it's a lot easier to communicate. You can see facial cues. You can use hand language. They can see your lips as you're speaking. You can do things together, like share a meal that are bonding. So I think as you seek to spend time, really doing that in person together is really helpful.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, my story of my brother once told me was really a beautiful story. He travels for work. He's traveled for years all over the States, especially the nation. And he said he started just asking people, "What's your story? What's your story?" Everywhere he went, he would say, "What's your story?" And he said, "I learned so much from people, all ages, all stages of life." But one trip he met a guy from Pakistan. And he said, "Well, I'm actually here on asylum and I'm waiting. Been waiting 3 years and trying to support my family and stay here." And it really gripped my brother's heart. And he came home one day, he's like, "Julie, I met this family from Pakistan. What do I do? How do I get to know them?" And I said, "Well, they don't live in your city, but every time you fly through, just spend some time with them." And so he actually started making a point to go. Every time he would fly through their city, he would stop and spend time and have a meal with them. And eventually it turned into, he invited the whole family to his house in San Diego to spend the weekend and just hang out and be together. And he learned that he had connections and people who could help their family. And so he used any connections that he had to just honor this family and say, "Hey, I just want to help out any way I can." And they became really good friends. And it really was a life-changing experience for my brother, and a beautiful way of just entering into a natural relationship. You're doing your daily job, maybe he's flying around, and just someone who just starts sharing their story and connects with your heart, and you connect with them. And you stay in that. You don't just say, "Okay, see you later." He didn't want to just say, "See you later." He really, really wanted to go farther than that. And he wasn't even living in the same city. And that was it was really eye-opening to me how it does take time. It takes intention too, when you're going to cross cultures, to learn to understand and touch their hearts. And how do you honor them and care for them, and vice versa.
And I think that what you mentioned is your brother's question really gets at the heart of what people are looking for. They want their life story, who they are, who they have become, and how they've become who they are. They want that to be recognized. They want a chance to share that. So that's a beautiful question. I love it.
Yeah, when it comes to social cohesion, what stands out to me, and I still use that starting in COVID and still do, was actually a meme that a friend of mine posted on Facebook with a lot of research behind it. And the meme said, "You can only change somebody's mind over dinner."
Uh-huh.
And what it means is nobody's going to change their mind because of your opinions. They're only going to change their mind because they see the person behind the opinions. And that the person behind the opinions is worth changing your mind for. So I kind of radically stopped talking about politics on Facebook because nobody's going to change their mind because what I say on Facebook. If I want to change somebody's mind, I just need to invest in them. I need to befriend them. I need to have them over for dinner. And then, of course, the danger is when I have them over for dinner, they might actually change my mind because I see what kind of person they are. Because that's what we're missing is we stop seeing each other as people, as persons. And we started seeing somebody as a caricature of their ideology or their religion or their political conviction, etc. So we need to go back to see people as people.
Yeah. That's really profound, Bart. I think that's so important. Because if we don't, then we can't even be in the same space with people who think different from us. Then we think we have to, go our separate ways, which is actually making us poorer human beings, I think. Well, you all on this call have had a chance to, in some way or another, be enriched by being in an intercultural environment, by stepping into an intimate relationship with somebody from a very different cultural background. So I'm just curious, as we wrap up, what would you consider the enriching part of being intercultural, being in a relationship with somebody who's culturally different? How has it enriched you?
I think Julie has enriched me in so many ways, and it's part is her culture, part is her personality, part is just who she is. For me, what stands out is actually my personality resonates very much with her culture. I'm a fairly indirect personality, and I'm somebody who needs a lot of affirmation to thrive, which in Dutch culture is not happening a lot. American culture is also very direct, but also very affirming. So it's actually quite natural for my wife to be affirming me because that's part of her culture. And that really enriched me.
Mm.
Now, of course, I'm still learning to affirm my wife all the time as well because she needs it just as much. But I grew up in Dutch culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's humbling. You realize that your ways and the way you grew up, the way you see things, not everybody sees that way. And I think the more relationships you get into with different people, or even marrying cross-culturally, you learn to step back and not be so quick to respond with opinions or this is the way you do things. And you learn to ask more questions. Oh, tell me why you say that. Or, where does that come from? And it's made me a better person. It's made me more compassionate. It's made me more loving and open, learning languages, understanding people. You stop around wherever you're going or walking or traveling, and you notice people. You notice real people from all around. And I don't think I, did that growing up so much, not even in my own town. And wherever I go, just looking for ways to love people, to honor them, to help, to serve, to care, to say, hey, what's your story, to take the time. And of course, Bart just completely enriches me, just who he is, his love and his heart for people. Everywhere we go, even our kids are like, where's Papa? He's talking with someone. Where's Papa? He's talking with someone. He's a little bit behind us because he saw someone, and he just takes the time to stop. And I've learned a lot from him in that just to observe around what's going on and not just be in my own little world, and has really made me want to pass that on to our kids and to other people around me.
It's precious. Bryce, Thelma?
I think for me, something that, Bryce definitely inspires me in so many ways just because of how different we are, even in personality. But he's definitely just enriched me to look at the world from a different point of view. Like for Bryce, he would be the one that would be more slow to speak than I would be. And I think just due to my personality, but I think honestly, seeing the way he would take more time to listen to someone and see where they're coming from. And then when he speaks, they kind of feel like he can relate to them, has just really enriched me to think of doing the same. And so I think that's something that I've started practicing a lot more. And I think just seeing also with Bryce's family, I got the chance to visit his family earlier on this year, and just seeing how much they would spend time with each other and not just spend time watching TV together, but actually asking each other how they're doing. So in where I'm from, you spend time doing things together. And really, at the end of the day, you spend hours together, but you don't really know how someone's doing because you're not really asking intentional questions. And so I show up to Bryce's family and it's completely opposite. His mom's asking me how I'm doing and she's asking me how work's going. And she's following up on something I mentioned a long time ago. And I'm like, whoa, interesting. How do you remember that? But I think just that culture has really, that really stood out to me. And it just really is like, wow, I should do that more. Like people have things that they want to share, things that they're thinking about. And if I can follow up or ask questions, then they can share and they can get a listening ear or even a shoulder to lean on. So I think that's something that has been enriching for me.
Wonderful. Bryce?
For me, I think thinking back on our different views on time, Thelma really has helped me learn what does it look like to love other people and to prioritize people over plans or time. Like there's a time, sure, to show up on time, but there's also a time to be flexible, to actually get to care for people. And for me, not to be so stuck in my plans for the day that I miss out on opportunities to care for other people or to make time to care for other people. And so I think seeing how my wife Thelma, makes the time to really get to know and care for many other people and to be flexible to do that, it's been an encouragement to me, definitely.
Well, fantastic. And as you're sharing how intercultural relationships have enriched you, I'm reminded of something that has also come out of COVID, and we see that in teams, in organizations, that the topic of creating relational strength or relational capital is all of a sudden hot again. And teams say, we need to get stronger in relationship on this team because that carries us through and it lifts us up. And as you are sharing how you've enriched each other, I'm just reminded of that and how, yes, it's true in with loved ones, but it's also as true in relationships with our colleagues at work. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm sure we could easily keep this going for much longer, chuck the time equation out of the window and just focus on relationships. But if you've been listening to this podcast today and you want to keep that conversation going, then in the notes you'll find ways to connect with the people on this podcast. But also I want to mention something that's really dear to my heart. Bart and Julie have now, for a number of years, been running Thriving Intercultural Marriage workshops since COVID, of course, virtually. And if you are intrigued by applying deep intercultural understanding to your relationship, then I would highly recommend that you reach out to Bart and Julie. They have such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom, and they've taken scores of couples through a very powerful program. So I highly recommend that. Thank you, Bart and Julie. Thank you, Bryce and Thelma, for joining us today. I really appreciate this. And thank you for making the time to be on this podcast.
Yes, our pleasure. Thank you for inviting us.
Our pleasure.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much, Marco.
Yeah, thanks, Marco.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Cultural Agility Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, share it with someone. The best way to help us out is by leaving a review on your favorite podcast app or channel, or forward and recommend this podcast to people around you. As always, if any of the topics we discussed today intrigue you, you will find links to articles discussing them in greater depth in the podcast notes. If you would like to learn more about intercultural intelligence and how you can become more culturally agile, you can find more information and hundreds of articles at knowledgeworks.com. A special thanks to Jason Carter for composing the music on this podcast and to the whole KnowledgeWorks team for making this podcast a success. Thank you, Nita Rodriguez, Ara Azizbekian, Rajitha Raj, and thanks to Vip and George for audio production, Rosalind Raj for scheduling, and Caleb Strauss for marketing and helping produce this podcast.